Okay, we're live. We'll just give like 5 to 10 minutes for people to join, and we have to share the link with people and make sure that everyone has access to the YouTube link. And I'm just going to be starting. I'm just going to be sharing the link with all the people because we're live now. Yes, everything looks good. We have 7 viewers. We're just going to wait for 3 more minutes. We're going to go live. We are live, but we're going to start our program officially at 11 a.m. For those of you who are joining, welcome to the stream. This is Rethinking Marxism's stream on the Indian general elections of 2024. And we're going to be uh, beginning our formal presentation in exactly 2 minutes. So please share this widely with your friends, with your social circles, with everyone, because this is going to be an amazing discussion. Fourteen. We're going to start in exactly 1 minute. We're going to start in exactly 1 minute. Okay, everyone, welcome to this discussion organized by Rethinking Marxism, a journal, a quarterly peer-reviewed academic journal covering Marxist analysis of economics, culture, and society. For those of you who don't know, Rethinking Marxism was established in 1988 and has been publishing peer-reviewed, innovative articles that use Marx or Marx's work since 2003. It's been published by Routledge on behalf of the Association for Economic and Social Analysis, ASA. Welcome to this discussion. This is going to be a session on the Indian general elections of 2024. My name is Shahram Azhar. I'm a associate professor of economics at Bucknell University in Pennsylvania, and I teach courses in Marxian political economy and development economics. And with me, I have a very esteemed panel. Firstly, Soundarya Chidambaram, who's an assistant professor of political science at Bucknell University. Uh, Soundarya has previously served as a senior fellow with the American Institute of Indian Studies, and her work is very interesting for us in the context of the present discussion because her PhD kind of made some stunning predictions which seem to be coming true in the previous as well as the present elections. Her work has also looked at patronage networks and their impact on political outcomes, in particular in the context of how BJP has used that particular device as an organizational as well as an electoral tool. So hopefully we'll get to learn from Soundarya in terms of how she looks at the present situation in the election. Next, we have Professor Rajesh Bhattacharya from IIM Calcutta. I understand that it's 8:30 p.m. In Calcutta. So thank you very much, Rajesh, for joining us. For those of you who don't know, Rajesh did his PhD in economics in 2010 from the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, and he's been part of the doctoral program at in IIM Calcutta, where he's teaching courses as well as supervising students on contemporary Indian political economy, theories of public policy, and his publications include all kinds of innovative contributions, which include how we can understand India's role in global value chains, how we understand global supply chains and their transformations, etc., in the global context. And he has some very innovative ideas on that particular front. So, welcome, Professor Rajesh Bhattacharya, to the stream. Uh, Thirdly, we have Anup Dhar, who's a member of the editorial board of Rethinking Marxism, and he has a fascinating CV that covers issues from post-colonial, decolonial critiques of society in general, and he has that particular perspective of looking at Indian politics as well. He's a former professor of psychology and professor of philosophy. So he's a truly interdisciplinary scholar and has been and is currently a fellow at the Hans Killian and Lotte Kohler Center for Cultural Psychology and Historical Anthropology at the Department of Social Theory and Social Psychology in Germany. So he has extensive experience, and hopefully he'll help us understand the psychoanalytic dynamics of what happened and how the electorate ended up voting in the ways it did. And finally, last but not least, certainly not the least, Professor Dipankar Basu, who is arguably one of the most influential Marxist intellectuals of our times. His work has, he's a very busy man, so he publishes uh, more, he has published more publications. We could devote an entire stream to his research and his work and the influential ideas that he has produced. For those of you who don't know, I just wanted to advertise his most recent book, The Logic of Capital. It's an amazing introduction to Marxist theory, its economics, and the various problems that uh, you know have arisen in Marxian theory since Marx's original work. And this amazing contribution, which has been published by Cambridge University Press, is a must read for anyone who's interested in Marxist theory and analysis. All right, guys, without further ado, I'm going to dive straight into the discussion. And the way it's going to work is very, very simple. I'm going to start with opening the panel up and beginning with an open ended question to all four panelists, which is number one, what do you think happened? And number two, why did it happen? So I'm going to start with Professor Basu, then Professor Rajesh Bhattacharya, then Professor Anup Dhar, and finally Professor Soundarya Chidambaram to present us with four different versions of what happened, why it happened, and then we're going to open it up to the public. Guys, if you want to ask any questions via Twitter, please use the hashtag AskRM to ask your question, and our moderators will be directing those questions towards me. So without further ado, please welcome Professor Dipankar Basu. everyone else could mute their microphones, that would be great, guys.
Thank you, Shahram. So let me dive right in. Uh, so I will talk about these two questions that Shahram posed: what happened and why it happened, in terms of 4 bullet points. First, I'll give a big picture overview of the main players, the main outcomes. Then I'll look into the details of BJP's performance, and those two will answer the what question. Then I will look at the why question, and for that I will turn to voter preference, and I will try to see why people voted the way they did, and then I will conclude. Okay, so let me begin with the big question. So, big picture. So, there are 543 parliamentary constituencies in India. And in this election, there were two major national political parties: the right wing Bharatiya Janata Party and the centrist Indian National Congress. And both of them had managed to form pretty big alliances. And those are the two alliances that we should be focusing on. One of them was the National Democratic Alliance, led by the BJP. Uh, it had some significant big players from different parts of the country. So let me point out a couple. So Telugu Desam Party from Andhra Pradesh in the south, Janata Dal United from Bihar in the east, Shiv Sena, which got divided into two parties. So this one faction of Shiv Sena from Maharashtra in the west, and PMK from Tamil Nadu. So these were the major alliance partners of the BJP in the NDA. There were other smaller players as well. Uh, then for the Indian National Congress-led alliance, which named its alliance very interestingly, it's called India. So it's the Indian National Developmental Inclusive Alliance. Indian National Congress being the main player, but again, we have significant big players from different parts of the country. Samajwadi Party from the important state of UP in north, DMK from the southern state of Tamil Nadu, one faction of the Shiv Sena, the Uddhav Thackeray faction from Maharashtra in the west, the Nationalist Congress Party from Maharashtra again in the west, and the Rashtriya Janata Dal from Bihar in the east. So these were the two main alliances which went into the election. So let me point out at the very outset the tone of their political campaign. And one way to look at the tone is to look at their manifesto. The NDA manifesto, the title of the manifesto was Modi Ki Guarantee. So Modi's guarantee. The electoral campaign of the NDA, the BJP in particular, was completely focused on the persona of the Prime Minister Narendra Modi, with some vague references here and there to welfare spending. Now, there is a very stark contrast if you look at the India Alliance. The title of the manifesto of the Indian Alliance was Nyay Patra, meaning Manifesto of Justice. So the electoral campaign was not focused on a personality, it was focused on issues. And they were looking at three important issues: economic inequality, social justice, minority rights. So these were the two big campaigns going into the election, and the results were stunning. Everybody had thought that BJP is going to win more than what it did last time. So let me turn your attention to the last three columns on this slide. The 2024 elections, BJP contested 432 seats. It won 240. That was 32 seats below the simple majority. It going into the election, it had thought it will win more than 400 seats. On the other hand, Congress contested 285 seats and it won 99 seats. Now, if we compare that with the previous Lok Sabha election in 2019, we see a striking difference. So in the previous election, BJP had contested roughly the same number of seats, 437. It had won 303 seats. So there is a decline of 63 seats. On the other hand, Congress last time had contested 421 seats. It was far more than what it could handle. It had won only 52 seats. This time it had won 47 more seats. And you can see that the seats that they contested was far lower. So that points out to an important way in which Congress managed the alliances this time. Instead of overreaching and trying to contest on every seat, it did good alliance management, and I will talk about that in a minute. So that's the big picture. Let's focus a little bit on BJP. Why did the BJP lose? One way to make sense of that is to divide the Indian states into two groups. What I will call the core BJP stronghold states. Most of them are in the north, central, or western regions of the country. And there is one southern state of Karnataka, which together form the core states of BJP. So if we divide the country into these two groups of states, we see that BJP lost 73 seats in its heartland, in its core states. There it contested 272 seats. It won only 178. Last time it had contested roughly the same number of seats and had won 251. And these states are the large states. So together they send 327 seats into the 543 Lok Sabha. So that's the major story. BJP declined in its core heartland. It managed to gain some outside its heartland in its stronghold. So that is the second part of the story we need to understand. The BJP managed to increase its seats outside its stronghold by 10. And that's how it came up with 63 short from last time. Now, before I go into the details, it is important to point out the big story. Why is this election result so significant? Now, BJP did emerge as the largest party. BJP and its allies did form the central government, but this still looks like an electoral defeat for the BJP. Why is that so? Because of the following reasons. Going into the election, BJP had by far the largest financial resources. It was reported that 55% of poll expenses of all political parties put together was what BJP spent. Second, mainstream media was completely dominated by BJP supporters. Nobody could hear anything against BJP in the mainstream media. Third, state machinery was used to systematically muzzle dissent. So all kinds of human rights activists, political activists were either hounded or put in jail. Two opposition party chief ministers in Delhi and Jharkhand were put in jail. And so despite all these things, the BJP, which went into the election thinking that it will win 400 seats, could not even achieve a simple majority. That is why these election results are so important. Now, but it is important, of course, to understand the details. So let me now go into the details. So to understand the details of BJP's performance, I will present some partial analysis, and I do not have all the data to do a complete analysis, but the analysis that I present does give us a pretty good picture. So this work that I'm presenting now on the details of BJP's performance is based on joint work with Karthik Mishra. So what we do, we look at the Indian states and divide into two groups. First group are the states where BJP improved its performance in terms of seats. And we choose 5 of those top states. So these are Odisha, Telangana. Odisha is in the east, Telangana and Andhra Pradesh in the south, Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh in the center. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it was getting cut. So that's the first group of states. The second group of states are those states where the BJP declined in terms of seats. So here we have Uttar Pradesh in the north, Maharashtra in the west, Rajasthan in the north, Karnataka in the south, and West Bengal in the east. And what we do is we look at the BJP's constituency level vote share performance across these two groups of states. Now, these two groups of states together comprise send 326 seats to the parliament. So it is a significant, but still not complete, and that's why I call it a partial analysis. Now, lot of commentators and analysts in the press have talked about state level vote share, and I think that is slightly misleading, and that is why we use constituency level analysis. So let me give you an example to highlight why using only state level vote share data is misleading. So let's look at the state of Punjab. In 2019, BJP won 9.63% of the popular vote. In 2024, 18.56. From this, can we draw the conclusion that BJP's support has increased? Well, I would say no. Why? Because we need to look at how many seats it contested. In 2019, it contested 3 seats. In 2024, it contested 13 seats. So mechanically, its vote share would certainly increase. So let's now focus on the 3 seats that BJP contested in both years. Gurdaspur, Amritsar, and Hoshiarpur. In all these seats, BJP's vote share declined to more than half of what it was in 2019. So therefore, if we just had looked at state level vote share, we would reach a very misleading conclusion, and that is why we need to use constituency level data. So let me therefore go to constituency level data and what we find. So I ask 3 important questions. One, what was BJP's decline limited to a few states? So we look at all the states and the answer is no. Its support declined significantly in many large states. In fact, its seats declined in 13 states, which together sent 335 seats to the parliament. So that's a significant majority. Now, the very important question is the second one. Was BJP's decline driven by a shift of votes away from it, or was it only a story of the consolidation of anti-BJP votes? And here I think we have very strong evidence that there was a shift of votes away from BJP in its heartland. So voters in its heartland sent a negative message to BJP. There is no ambiguity in this. Third question is something that we also need to think about. Did BJP face a national rout? And there the answer is no. There are many states where the BJP either maintained its position or improved. In fact, these, I would say, are 22 states and union territories, which together send 200 seats to the parliament. So overall picture, about 60% of constituencies in its heartland, in central, north, and west of India, BJP declined. But 40% of constituencies, which is outside its heartland, it either remained steady or improved. So to highlight these things, let me first show you some numbers from the first group of states. So these are the states where the BJP managed to improve its seat share. So these are the 5 states that we are looking at. The vote share that I have here is the average of the constituency level vote share. So in these states, which have 103 seats, in 2019, BJP contested 103 and won 51. This time it contested 82 and won 70. And its average vote share increased from 36.5 to 49. So a significant increase. If we then look at subsets like the seats that it contested in both years, there were 82 of them. BJP's vote share increased from 42 to 50%, so 41 to 59%. And then if we look at various subsets, BJP's vote share increased in every subset. So there is no doubt that there were a large number of states and constituencies where BJP improved its performance. So this should not be ignored. But now let's come to the heartland states. These are the states and the constituencies where the BJP lost in terms of seats. And here there is some interesting story. So these states, these 5 states together sent 223 seats to the parliament. In 2019, BJP contested 197 and won 152. Its vote share was 50%. This time around, it contested around the same number, 195, but it won only 85 seats. And its vote share declined significantly to about 45%. So 5% decline. But again, this is an average figure. Let's go a little deeper. If we look at the seats that it contested in both elections, those are 192, its vote share declined from 50 to 44. So that's more or less the overall picture. Now, to understand whether people actually moved away from BJP, we can look at a subset. So these are the seats that it had won in 2019 but lost in 2024. So here is the two scenarios. If it was only about a consolidation of anti-BJP votes, then BJP's vote share in these seats should not have changed, even though it lost because the anti-BJP vote consolidated. So the red row that we have here, these are those seats. So these are 72 seats which BJP won in 2019 but lost in 2024. The vote share declined from 51% to 42%. So there is a 9% decline in votes in these seats. This is unambiguous evidence in my mind that a lot of people moved away from BJP. It was not only a story of consolidation of anti-BJP votes, it was a story of people moving away from BJP, and we will come to the reasons why. So here are some examples. If we look at Uttar Pradesh, so the first constituency is Varanasi, that's PM's constituency. BJP won in both times, but its vote share declined by 9%. The next constituency, Amethi, which is an important constituency, BJP won in 2019 but lost in 2024. BJP's vote share declined by 12%. Mainpuri constituency, a stronghold of the SP, BJP lost in both times. Again, its vote share declined by 4%. And Amroha constituency, this is the most interesting, has been a stronghold of the BSP. Now, BJP lost it in 2019 but won it this time. But there also its vote share declined by 3%. So all kinds of combinations, you can see that BJP's vote share declined. So that is a robust story as far as its heartland goes. Now, I would like to briefly talk about one important aspect, which is BJP's performance by phases of the election. So in this election, there were 7 phases in which polling happened. And why this is important is because BJP, and especially the Prime Minister's electoral campaign, sustained and increased the divisive rhetoric and the hate speech against Muslim as the election, the phases progressed. So it is important to see if the electorate reacted to that or how it did. So if you look at the last 2 columns, you can see that in all the phases, BJP lost seats compared to 2019. And most importantly, the loss did not go down. It never converted into a gain. In fact, if anything, the loss increased during the election campaign. So this seems to be sending the message that the electorate did not get divided and vote according to the divisive rhetoric which the BJP was trying to use, because it had started feeling that it was not getting the kind of support it wanted. So this, I think, is a very important piece of evidence to keep in mind. Okay, so that's the kind of points that we can use to understand the what happened. So now let's come to why. So to understand why is complicated. Voter preference is not very easy to pin down. So here I use data from the pre and post poll surveys conducted by CSDS Lokniti, a research organization which is independent of the government and which has been conducting these surveys for many, many decades. So it is a well-respected independent agency, and we can believe the data it puts out. So in 2024, its pre-poll survey had 10,000 about sample size and post-poll about 20,000. The full individual level data is not yet available, but many articles have been written in the Hindu based on these, and I draw on those articles. So I asked two important questions. One, did economic reasons play any role in voters turning against BJP? And second, did the voting pattern of caste and religious groups contribute to BJP's loss? The answer to the first question, I think, is that yes, economic reasons were very important, especially inflation and unemployment were the big concerns that led to people voting against BJP. Second, there was a question about whether a household's economic situation has improved. And very interestingly, we see that those whose economic conditions have not improved according to the survey, they have overwhelmingly voted against BJP. Those whose situation have improved, they have overwhelmingly voted again for BJP. And those whose situation have remained unchanged, about half. So this two together shows that economic reasons do play a very important role, and it did play a role this time in turning voters away from BJP. The second, about caste and religious groups, there is pretty robust evidence that Muslims, a significant portion of Dalits, and even a significant portion of other backward castes voted in favor of INC and the Indian alliance. So they shifted towards the Indian alliance, and that led to their victory. So we can talk about particular states, but let me give you the national picture. So this is an answer to the following question. Why should, so people were asked in the pre and post poll survey, what is the reason for voting against BJP? So you can see in the pre-poll survey, 20% said inflation, and that increased to 30% in post-poll. In the pre-poll, 32% said unemployment, and that did not decline a lot. It remained stable at 27%. So roughly 50% of voters said that they are voting against BJP because of economic reasons of inflation and rising unemployment. Now let's look at household economic situation. So here people were asked, as compared to 5 years ago, is the economic condition of your household better, remained same, or worsened? So about 53% said that it had not improved. So either it remained same or had worsened. Now, if you look at these red numbers, you will see that for those who it worsened, 53% voted against BJP and for Congress and its allies, and only 21% voted in favor of BJP. Whereas if you look at those whose condition improved, more than 60%, close to 60% voted in favor of BJP, and those whose condition remained same, there was a division of roughly 50-50. So that's the economic aspect. Now let's look at the social and religious groups. So here, the main thing that comes out is that Muslims shifted 20 percentage points of their vote from towards Congress and its allies. So this is a national figure, 15 plus 5, 20%. If you look at Dalits, about 7%. What is interesting is that even OBCs, so upper OBCs, about 11% shifted towards Congress, and lower OBCs, another 7%. So if you add up these social groups, then you can see a significant move of the marginalized social and religious categories moving away from BJP and in favor of the India alliance. So here is a way to summarize what we find. So there is significant decline in BJP's electoral performance and support in its core states. Key reasons seem to be a lack of any Modi wave or any national wave, and therefore local factors came into play. So every state, Uttar Pradesh, Maharashtra, West Bengal, Karnataka, everywhere, local factors were important. This is unlike the previous two elections where it was a national wave, pro Modi or anti Modi, or nationalism, anti nationalism, etc. Second, there was significant number of people who felt that there had not been any improvement in their economic condition, and they voted, a large segment of them voted against BJP, especially for inflation and unemployment. Now, if we look at social and religious groups, the attacks on Muslims and Dalits over the last 5 years, and the robust campaign by the opposition to champion their rights and to speak for them led to significant shift of uh, Muslims and Dalits and also OBCs towards the India alliance. And thirdly, the opposition did manage to come together and work in a way that was much better than last time. So one way to think of this is to look at the key party of the opposition alliance, Indian National Congress. Last time, as I said, it had its alliance, which was called the UPA, did not really function in many states where it wanted to contest on its own. So it contested 421 seats, but this time it was much more realistic. It contested only 285 seats. So let me conclude with the larger story, the larger message that I take away from this election. Modi's image of electoral invincibility has been shattered. So running up to the election, the Indian media was always talking about this kind of invincibility that has been shattered. BJP's politics, if we focus on its core ideas, has been based on, in my opinion, these three things: Hindu nationalism, a business friendly economic policy, which kind of shades into crony capitalism, and welfare spending and patronage. Now, it had been thought that the previous two elections showed that this combination was electorally difficult to challenge. My reading from the election results is that it can be challenged, it has been challenged effectively in its heartland on a politics based on secularism, minority rights, social justice, and economic growth focused on the problem of unemployment. So the welfare spending remains. So a politics which wants to defeat BJP can base itself on this. It is not necessary, as the Congress often did before, to try to pander to Hindu majority sentiments. That is not the only way to defeat BJP. This election has shown us that a robust politics based on secularism, economic justice, and social justice can defeat the BJP. But the BJP did make inroads outside its core states. So much work needs to be done by the opposition. So there is a mixed story, but I think overall it's a big victory for democracy against the politics of hate and divisiveness. Thank you.
Amazing presentation, Professor Basu. And I think point that you make at the end about how a robust politics that is not divisive but is rather based on secularism, democracy, social justice, the rights of oppressed working class, peasantry, women, children, and of course, peace with Pakistan, which is something that I'm deeply concerned about for obvious reasons. Uh, all of those have played a role in the electoral, relatively speaking, in terms of the comparative analysis that you've done. We see that it can be called a defeat in the relative sense of the term. But even though they're going to be forming the government, it's important for everyone else to understand what the dynamics were that went into it. Thank you very much. That was very, very comprehensive. And I have some questions which I will return to at the end. Uh, thank you. I want to turn now to Professor Soundarya Chidambaram. Uh, and it's the same question. It's an open-ended question that I'm going to be asking, guys. By the way, no one needs to worry about the time because our viewers seem to be loving our stream, so we have as much time as we want. So please feel free to present your opinion, the way you want to. So Soundarya, the floor is open. Please go ahead. Please, you'll have to unmute. Sorry.
Of course. I was saying thank you very much for allowing me to present some of my comments, and I was thanking Professor Basu for such a comprehensive analysis of the elections, which is very helpful. So what I'm probably going to do is amplify some of the things that have already been pointed out very ably by Professor Basu. So the first thing is, of course, the whole election kind of hinging on this charismatic, sort of godlike leadership of Modi, right? Which is how the last two elections were won. He, with the 36-inch chest and all of that, and all the sort of machismo that kind of came with that. So I think it sort of the BJP and Modi became a victim of their own hubris and propaganda. The fact that they completely controlled the media, the mainstream media, and sort of started putting out these stories way before the election, way before polls, that they were going to, make or score more than 400 seats in the election, and then they sort of started believing the story that they put out themselves. This is not dissimilar from Indira Gandhi's loss in the 1977 election, following the emergency, where again the government becomes a victim of its own propaganda and starts to believe that it's actually legitimate. So I think that's kind of one of the things that's very important about this election, that Modi can no longer really sort of be the vote getter for the BJP. The BJP really has to focus on an agenda that is much beyond this sort of charisma kind of factor. Which then brings me to the second point. A lot of people have talked about this, but why are people shifting? And ultimately, it's about the economy, stupid, as the famous line goes, right? Where if you're talking about sabka saath, sabka vishwas, you're talking about a politics of aspiration, all of the stuff that you do with divisive identity politics is only going to take you so far. If you don't follow it up with what you're actually promising in terms of roti kapra makan, employment, bringing inflation down, it's not going to go much further than this, right? Even with all the pomp and circumstance that accompanied the building of the temple and this whole inauguration in January, this is why sort of the results are so astounding, that that politics can only take you so far. If it doesn't come with employment, if it doesn't come with basic services, people are going to ultimately see through this. So this is what I put out on social media right after the election results. I don't know who this is. This has been attributed to President Lincoln, but what I said was, you can fool some of the people all of the time, all of the people some of the time, but you cannot fool all of the people all of the time. And I think that's kind of what the results have shown. The third thing that I want to quickly talk about is this notion of whether there is Hindutva fatigue. Professor Suhas Palshikar, who's a very famous political analyst from India, a professor of political science, talked about how this was likely to happen, that people were going to move away because of the Hindutva fatigue. And I would sort of push back a little bit against this, because this kind of ties into the notion that somehow the Hindu vote bank is actually monolithic, that you can convince all of the Hindus to kind of vote as one, a vote bank, a monolithic bloc, because you can use identity politics to kind of drive a wedge between them and the marginalized sort of minorities, particularly the Muslims, right? But the idea is that even in the states that, the BJP sort of did well in 2014 and 2019, there is a very sort of interesting nuanced dynamic. So I think Professor Basu was pointing this out. The Dalits, the OBCs, the Muslims, actually there were a sizable number of people who did vote for the BJP from amongst these marginalized classes for the BJP in the last election. So why are they moving away? This is not because, of Hindutva, but this is because what they were promised was protection from the BJP against other dominant Hindu castes, right? The OBCs, the Muslims the Muslims have their own sort of caste divisions as well in UP. So all of these castes or all of these little groups were basically sort of pissed off with the land-owning castes, such as the Yadavs, or the oppression by some of these middle castes that are very, that are taking away their benefits. So this is kind of what the BJP had promised them, that this is not sort of about bringing all of the Hindus together, but really sort of, breaking the hegemony of the dominant sort of middle caste, the landowning castes, in the UP heartland. So if you don't do that, it's not sort of a question of people shifting away from Hindutva. It's really the people sort of saying, hey, the BJP didn't really come through with their promises of breaking this hegemony. So we're going to go back and sort of, find a new alliance that will speak to our aspirations, right? So that's something that is important to keep in mind. And then I think my final point, and this has sort of been my shtick both in my dissertation and all of the stuff that I've done, which is about civil society. So people have been celebrating this victory as sort of, opening up the space for democracy, sort of, resistance movements becoming more possible now. But remember that it also opens up civil society for the BJP. And one thing that people forget is that the BJP is not an ordinary run-of-the-mill dominant party in India. It's a movement party. The reason why the BJP became so successful, if we trace it back, is because it has a very cadre-based movement that has significant grassroots presence, right? It is very, very legitimate. It's kind of worked away, chipped away at sort of, created legitimacy for its ideology at the very grassroots level. So this is something that, we need to sort of think about. What is the BJP going to do now? Is it going to retreat? Is it going to sort of, fall away or, position itself away from Hindutva? The BJP might do this, but there is a whole movement apparatus that supports the BJP that's going to probably double down on Hindutva, and this is what they've always done. When you look at the data, and I have done this in various articles, when you look at where the RSS and the Seva Bharati, its welfare provision sort of wing, what it did, particularly after the 2004 and 2009 defeats, was it substantially spiked its presence in the grassroots through welfare services such as education, healthcare, self-reliance, supporting micro credit groups for women, for instance. And this is why it's reaping the rewards of that even now. The fact that, women have, turned out in great numbers to vote for the BJP in the last few elections is a result of this, right? And then, of course, it tapered off in 2014 and 2019 as the BJP became much more successful electorally. So the BJP kind of losing votes or seats now is simply an indication to the cadres to kind of step up their grassroots programming again. And that's exactly what will probably start happening. So it's not the disappearance of Hindutva, it is the sort of reincarnation, if you will, of Hindutva in new forms at the grassroots level. So I think that's where I kind of want to stop so that we have time for other comments.
Thank you, Soundarya. These were amazing comments. In particular, the way you embed welfare and BJP's community-based politics. This is something that I found fascinating about your dissertation as well, and a number of predictions, it seems, are unfortunately coming true that are based on your particular idea. Thank you very much for those insightful comments. I next want to turn to Professor Anup Dhar, who's going to be presenting. It's the same question: what happened, and what's your story? What do you think happened, and why do you think it happened?
Thank you, Sharam, for making this possible. Actually, this discussion, I think it is a much needed discussion, I must thank Professor Basu and Professor Chidambaram. Actually, they have kind of made the main points, perhaps. So let me not at all repeat what they have said. I'm kind of in deep agreement with them. So try to not at all repeat what has already been said. Try my best to not do that. Um, my journey, as I have been observing this, and I actually observe the election process a little bit, if I may put it this way, from below, actually, because um, we have been working in rural and forest societies, largely with indigenous and Dalit communities, largely communities of Dalit and indigenous women, since 2011. Very, 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 very closely, actually. Um, and our idea was to build uh, a space for social self and political transformation from below. Kind of attempt a rural reconstruction from below. And so I have been looking at this election from a very different side, actually, not from the side of the exit polls or national mainstream media. Um, uh, they actually don't matter so much at the ground, and this election has again showed it. So these 15 years of kind of intense engagement, sometimes we get the story well before the elections happen, actually, that this is going to happen this time. Uh, and here I would say, actually, I will put up some of the I would call them scholars, thinkers, Yogendra Jadhav being one, who actually see, against all common wisdom or popular wisdom, if I may call it, had actually kind of suggested, including uh, others as well, who had actually suggested something very different from what the dominant was saying all the time. Now, how did they do it? Is it because, and there is actually a very interesting interview of Yogendra Jadhav by Shekhar Gupta, and where this question comes up, that, and they say, ki, oh, we are the old ones, we are the old style ones, and now, new exit polls, which are largely driven by the logic of market, which will have to give a number, actually, and there, the CSDS Lokniti work by Sanjay Ji is also important, actually, who doesn't give those numbers, because he's not driven merely by the logic of market, but by the logic of research, sound, rigorous, grounded research. Uh, so there is no rush to give the numbers exactly as soon as the polling ends. And Sanjay ji has kind of suggested that the rush to offer numbers actually got many of the exit polls wrong, because they actually quickly collated the seventh phase, where the BJP has fared nearly the lowest in terms of vote share and seats and all of that. So the seventh phase was collated so quickly that you actually can end up getting the numbers wrong, because you are not doing the work in a very, very grounded way when you are trying to come up with that big bang number on national television exactly at 6 o'clock, maybe, or 7 o'clock, like that. So why were some of the ones who were in the ground getting it right? Because perhaps, and this is worth contemplating upon, they were not doing surveys. They were not just trying to get the numbers. They were talking to people. And Yogenji says it, and others also say it, actually. Even we saw it, actually. When you talk to people for some time, have a cup of tea in a chai shop, they start with the statement, I'll vote for BJP. But you speak for 11 to 12 minutes, and the story comes out as a much more complex picture than what it looks at the beginning. Do elections happen not just because of, you know, and I'll put it this way, simply rational, conscious arguments. Do elections and voting patterns happen, which is why we repeatedly get surprised, actually. Uh, do they happen at levels that are effective? And of course, the economy is important, but human feelings, human emotions, human affect. Let me put it this way, affect is also effective. Okay, so people do vote for many, many reasons, actually, not just merely for economic reasons, but economic reasons, conscious, rational arguments are important when people are voting, but they like or dislike. There is irrational likes and there are irrational dislikes when we vote. And the analogy that comes to me is sports, actually, where we have irrational likes and dislikes for particular sporting entities, actually, in football, in cricket. So does the electoral process also operate at that level? It is a question worth pondering upon, actually, as a research methodology question in the social sciences. Actually, are we going to did these people get it right because they were sitting and talking to people? The old style, kind of quasi conversational attention to unsaid words, attention to silences, including a little bit of fear that was operative at the ground. This time, people did not want to speak, actually. That needs to be taken into consideration. So in that sense, this election, number of processes were they at work, including the economic. And here the rethinking Marxism framework of overdetermination, I think, is relevant, that economic, political, cultural, even natural factors contributed to how people voted, and the voting process is never perhaps conscious, rational, but unconscious, irrational attractions, irrational passionate attachments, and irrational detachments are at work sometimes. When you feel suddenly let down by somebody you pinned your hopes on, exactly what happened around that slogan, Achhe Din. So we had pinned our hopes over there. Uh, and there, I think, what the right wing organizations as a group managed to do was to stitch a kind of socio-symbolic coalition or base. And they had it was not a simple division between bourgeois and proletariat. It is not a two-layered society. Indian society, as it is, very, very complex, actually. It's many, many countries into one, actually. The BJP, actually, I feel, had managed to actually stitch different layers in different ways at different times in different states and localities. Okay, so it is not that the same layers were stitched. So it's not that the lower half voted for BJP or the upper half voted for BJP of Indian society, actually. So I think there we need to also come out of that old understanding that there is an upper half and a lower half, seeing class as upper half and lower half. So the BJP actually could cut across layers and stitch a combination, which the Congress also did once upon a time quite well, actually, which many of the social movements, agitations, Mandal and all problematized. And this stitching did not work for BJP this time. There was a crack in this stitch, actually. It's not that the stitch has been torn apart, as Professor Basu and Sandhya also pointed out, it's not that the stitch is over. No, the BJP is stitching of different layers. Hindu upper caste, okay, extremely poor people receiving welfare, beneficiaries, the quote unquote, the beneficiary segment. Okay. In the southern India, we are seeing the extremely poor, extremely backward caste. This time it's appearing, it's too soon to call it actually, but appearing that they have voted more for the BJP this time. Okay. So it's a complex picture actually, and in that sense, that very complex overdetermined stitching that the BJP could do across castes, across classes, across gender, actually has been cut, wilted a little bit this time. So it is not intact anymore. And what Professor Basu also showed, how the Muslim, Dalit, parts of OBC, not only the lower OBC, as he beautifully showed, it's also the upper OBC sometimes, actually, the aspirational OBC and the beneficiary OBC. So in different ways, that combination has been jilted, that combination has been displaced actually, and that very, very, I would say, clever way of stitching that combination, which they did in UP last time, has not worked this time. So local, contingent, and I would call it a multiplicity of factors actually. It's not one factor. We should not call it in terms of one mega metaphysical factor that will explain the entire election process. No, number one. Number two, of course, I think, as Professor Vasu was pointing out, let me add, in addition to the coalition of the INDIA, I felt that the Bharat Jodo Jatra and the Nyaya Jatra actually contributed to cutting into that stitch, that had been organized actually. And perhaps that actually gave a little bit of horizontality to the quasi-vertical stitching that the BJP had managed to work out. So again, as if the class caste question in a horizontal manner had come up, whereas the BJP had managed a more vertical stitching over here. And I think and I'm actually saying the last thing now, if we have to work on a process of rethinking Indian society, Indian polity, Indian politics, the hitting the road, hitting the street, the walk, the Dandi March, Gandhi, the subject that walks through the country, is an important political trope, is an important political move. It's a symbolic move as well as a relational move, actually. It really reconnects the leaders. What we call a mass leader is born through the walk. And Shiv Vishwanathan has a beautiful piece on the walk, why the walk is very, very important in the Indian subcontinent, actually. And Gandhi did it very, very well. He would always hit the street whenever he had to raise a question. This is one. So the two jatras definitely contributed to. It also did one more thing, I think. While in 2014, the Congress was on the side of the elite, and BJP was on the side of the anti-establishment critique of the Congress. I think over time, in the last 10 years, the sundial has tilted, actually. The Congress, Rahul Gandhi, actually, on the street looks more subaltern than the Prime Minister And similarly, the corruption question now looks to be on the other side, actually. While in 2014, it's the anti-corruption movement that brought the Congress down, of many, many causes. No one cause brings any government down. Here, actually, the other side looked more corrupt. And that became an important question, actually. So the charge of corruption was coming from this side, this time from the side of India, rather than on that side. And here, another question I think I would want to foreground, in addition to the economic question, the question of the moral high ground in politics. The question of the moral ground in politics, in India especially, is very, very important, because religion and politics, remain two sides of the same coin sometimes. And the question of the moral high ground, my dharma becomes very, very important. And as if the India bloc looks to be on the side of dharma in 2024, whereas they look to be on the other side, on the side of adharma in 2014. And that's a fundamental shift that has happened over here. And that is the politics of perception, the politics of narrative. Who is on the side of dharma? That is one. The other few details actually are important. The Hindu upper caste vote remains with the BJP still. So, as Professor Chidambaram pointed out, Hindutva is not dead. It is going to come back in a displaced form, perhaps. Peasants have shifted partially to the BJP, to the India bloc from the BJP. And interestingly, the shift is more significant in the CSDS Lokniti survey in Rajasthan, Telangana, Haryana, Karnataka, and UP. In UP, it's from 62% to 82%. In Haryana, it's 33 to 64, nearly doubling that shift. So the farmers' agitation and farmer distress both definitely contributed. But again, it's not an economic question only. The farmers were, and I was spending some time in Haryana in the last 8-9 months. The farmers were most distressed by the fact that they were not heard. They were called anti-nationals. They were called terrorists. Okay, they were not listened to. That was really and here the question of hurt becomes important. So when one votes, one doesn't merely calculate the economic benefits one gets. One also votes on the basis of emotions and affect. The economically extremely poor section, and this data is important. I really would want to go more into this data with help from my economist friends. The small service providers, the artisanal class, and the landless laborers have still voted for the BJP. So it's not that vote base, that stitching across classes has completely got eroded in this election. So we should not also be too complacent, actually. And here, where it has shifted significantly is Haryana, UP, Bihar. This data is very, very important for us, especially in RM. I think we really need to look at this data. It's not that the poor have all block shifted to the India coalition. No, they have still stuck with the BJP in most of the states, except it appears in Haryana, UP, and Bihar. So that is also an important information we need to hold on to. The Dalit shift, Professor Basu has already shown. I think that is very, very important, extremely important in UP. But Professor Basu, the question would be, and this is not a question I'm asking you, why did it work in UP and not work in Bihar? So these are again multiplicity of local factors that are at work, actually. And again, in Bihar, the BJP managed to stitch the coalition right. But in UP, it did not work. Another very disturbing data, actually, right, like the extremely economically backward class and caste data, actually, which still is with the BJP, actually, is that the Adivasi votes have significantly increased for the BJP in this election. and it has decreased for the Congress, which we are seeing in Madhya Pradesh, in Chhattisgarh, partly in Jharkhand. Telangana become very, very important. Even in Karnataka, the indigenous community has voted for the BJP. And it's looking like the rise is from 31% to 51%. That's a significant rise, actually. Um, uh, um, so this is another side. I would put it, the Ayodhya question, actually, who lost, who won there, has been debated many times. I think the Ram question, and it's a sensitive question actually, but the Ram question comes in two forms to the Indian people. One, it comes as Ram, the figure, the idol, and the temple, and the worship of the idol, which is important, in at least northern India. However, Ram also comes with Ram Rajya. It is also a kind of rule. It is also a kind of ruling morally and ethically, which was actually Gandhi's way of invoking Ram. So here also, actually, while the BJP got the Ram temple, maybe they slipped on the question of Ram Rajya. And many Ayodhya inhabitants said that, but because of the coming in of large capital, big capital, and new institutions set up in Ayodhya, we have lost our livelihoods, and even the highways displaced us. So that one road for all, one highway for all model may not work in a culture. I know I'm bringing in a cultural question over here, but perhaps it's important. In a culture of maternal feminine polytheism, Spivak has called it maternal polytheism. Okay, a culture of maternal polytheism. It's not a monotheist culture. It's not one male god. It's a multiplicity of mother and female goddesses, multiple cultures. In Bengal, it's very difficult to enter with this one monotheist framework. Okay. So it's quite difficult to actually touch the Indian population with this one god, one monotheist framework model. Um, and hence loyalty is not perpetual in the Indian population, actually. So it's not that you give them the temple and they will be loyal on only one. So there is a multiplicity that political organizations need to take note of. The question of social justice over Hindutva, the caste census, social coalition, from nationalism to the politics of caste. Professor Basu and Professor Chidambaram have already pointed it out. Those are really important this time in this time's election, and that needs to be taken into consideration. But again, the question is why it worked in UP and did not work in Bihar. So that we will always have to explain. So what I'm trying to get at and end is that there are layers and layers over here. There are 1,000 plateaus, actually. It's not one layer through which this thing has happened. A multiplicity of contingent emergent factors have come together. It can come together in a different way next time, actually. So we need to be very careful, actually, and very rigorous in how we are understanding this situation. I'll just end with one moment in India's history, and the point Professor Basu ended with, that what do we do now? What happens? Okay. Uh, uh, of course, secularism, minority rights, social justice, newer forms of social coalition, stitching, unemployment, empowerment of women, jobs, inflation, all these are very important. But they have to come together in a very interesting coalition. No one thing is going to do it. Simply welfare is not going to do it. Then Mr. Yagan would have won in Andhra Pradesh. That very same welfare has perhaps worked in Bengal, actually. Okay. So we need to be very careful that there is no one magic pill or magic bullet with which one can work it out fully. India's politics is the politics between the Pracharak and the Satyagrahi. The RSS Pracharak in India's villages, as Professor Chidambaram was also hinting at, that they will really work very hard and they will do very good welfare work. According to them, it would be good. Okay. And the Satyagrahi, the Gandhian Satyagrahi. The assassination of Gandhi is very important, hence, actually, because that is the tension in Indian society, the rural village moral exemplar, the rural village moral exemplar model in Indian society. So these elections cannot be simply fought from above, they have to be fought from below. And the battle in Indian society is between the Pracharak and the Gandhian Satyagrahi, the RSS Pracharak and the Gandhian Satyagrahi. For a short while, the RSS Pracharak had won. And the RSS Pracharak was there. School education, natural calamities, floods, they were there with a pot of rice. Okay. They were there to help people. They were there to assist people, take them to a hospital. Okay. Which the Gandhian moral exemplar, the Satyagrahi, also did once upon a time. This vote has also happened from below. We were bailed out by the Indian people from below, this time in India's election. Okay. But it won't happen again and again if the Pracharak and the Satyagrahi angle is not rethought in the Indian context, actually. So somewhere a new India will only be born from below, not from above. Not simply by state policies. It will be born from below. And if we actually look constituency by constituency, what we will find is that multiple Satyagrahis, who did not call them Satyagrahis, they could be some village elders, village leaders, some older people in the village, okay, somebody who knew a little better, okay. And these contestations happened between that segment and the old style Pracharak. And some local consensus, local ideas of transformation got birthed. And those ideas of transformation become very important to actually rethink a non-right path for India. But that path will only come from below. And it will not only come from above. Thank you.
Amazing. That path will only come from below. It will not come from above, as it always has. Progressive and revolutionary movements are always about combining the multitudinal differences and complexities in a movement. I was reminded of this amazing book I read a couple of months ago by the great Amartya Sen. It's called The Argumentative Indian, in which he rightly points out the differences of views and opinions and shades of views and opinions that Indian society comes with. So thank you, Anup, for trying to help us understand that complexity. Finally, I want to turn to Professor Rajesh Bhattacharya, who has waited very, very patiently. And I am also aware of the fact that there's a number of questions waiting for us, but there's no rush. We have a lot of time. This is a complex topic, as Professor Anup Dar rightly pointed out. And please, Professor Rajesh Bhattacharya, over to you.
Thank you, Sharan. It's sometimes difficult to come at the end But here, in this case, it is actually helpful because I hardly have anything to add to the analysis presented by Soundarya, Anup, and Dipankar. Of course, I was expecting a very thorough presentation by Dipankar, knowing him, and he basically covered most of the points, and then the other points also came up. The data itself was very comprehensive. So what I plan to do is basically kind of build on what has already been said and try to draw some conclusions. I will not focus on the why question because I think that has been answered in many ways by all three of them. So let me go back to the what question. What happened, right? In fact, let me start by saying what it is not. So first of all, if you go back to 2004, when the NDA government, under the leadership of Atal Bihari Vajpayee, was expected to win handsomely, they lost. And I still remember that election because it was a complete surprise to many. And the Congress came back to power and had a 10-year term after that. This election is not a 2004, not only because the defeat, if we call it a defeat of the BJP, was less emphatic than what it was in 2004, but also because, as if you listen to all the points that have been presented, there is no narrative like that in 2004. In 2004, it was very clear. The BJP campaigned on the Shining India platform that India is shining, therefore they are going to win, and they lost badly because they only focused on the urban, more affluent parts of India, whereas the suffering Bharat basically taught them a lesson by voting them out, by a big margin. This is not such a clear, emphatic verdict as Dipankar, Soundarya, and Anup has pointed out painstakingly. Does this mean it's a lesser verdict? Does this mean that we should not read too much into it? It's not such a big deal, which is what the ruling party is trying to say. What is there to talk about? We are BJP is the largest party. The alliance is in place. Nobody is leaving the alliance as of now. Some of the actions that have been taken already in the 2 weeks don't appear to signify any shift from what they have been doing in the past, right? I would argue that it is a very significant verdict because a lot was at stake. And I think the electoral victory in terms of numbers is not always the significance of the verdict. A lot was at stake. I think the people who went to the elections, it was quite palpable during the election phase. Of course, it was being talked about even before that, but it was quite palpable during the 7 phases, the long drawn-out election, that a lot was at stake. And that is what I will try to kind of point out. What was at stake? If the BJP had won a single largest majority or crossed the number that it had got in the last time, 303, it would have cemented its status as an invincible party at the national level. Let us not forget that BJP has been regularly defeated at the state elections. There are many state elections where they have lost very badly, right? And by big margins, big time, right? There were phases, 1 year, 1.5 years, in the last 10 years when they lost one election after another in several big states. Then why did it appear to be invincible? Because at the local level, at the regional level, all these multiplicities were playing out. But when it came to the idea of India, or the idea of the nation, their view reigned supreme. There was no other view. There was nothing, there were no boundaries for them. They could keep expanding on their views, and there were no boundaries for them. It was an unconstrained expansion for the BJP. I think that national imagination was at stake. And I think this push, even if it is a small push, even if it is a patchwork of resistance or setbacks in different states, and which is, I think Anup pointed out very clearly, that if you look at the factors, if you look at the social groups, the regions, then you really find a very complex picture emerging, right? But if that did not happen, then what we were looking at is possibly a confirmation that the Indian polity has fundamentally and irreversibly changed. And I think that was what at stake, that our political imagination, the horizon of political imagination, would have considerably shifted if that win, which they predicted of crossing 400, of doing much better than the previous 2019 election, if that actually materialized. And I think I felt it was quite palpable. So everybody, I mean, Anup worked on the ground, but even those who did not work so much on the ground could feel it in the air, that everyone was very tensed, that what would be the outcome? Can we at least keep the horizon open? I think that was very important. So secondly, there was this idea that the sheer resources commanded by the BJP was simply unbeatable. You know, money, resources, the complete control over media, and so on. I would like to point out that it was not always true in all elections. In fact, there were a little bit of news where it was clear that in some of the state level elections, regional parties actually outspent BJP in some of the elections. So it was not true if you look closely at the data, but it appeared at the national level that it was almost unbeatable, particularly when it came to the media. There was no space left, that was the impression. Even on social media, BJP had a head start by miles, right? And that was the impression, what the impression was. As the election progressed, stage by stage, it was surprising how much on social media the voices of the opposition got traction. And according to some commentators on the media, and largely the perception that many people had, is that ultimately when you saw what happened during the 7th stage election, on social media, voice on the opposition outperformed the BJP, even when they controlled the mainstream media. So these are important lessons where we thought that we didn't have the means and we didn't have the space for even imagining an alternative. I think the election kept this open, right? There were signs on the ground that it was not as invincible, as I said, at the state level in the election. But some of the national level, those things didn't scale up. At the national level, there was a Tina factor. And I think that is very important thing that happened. And then a couple of things that happened. I think others also mentioned. The Prime Minister won from the Varanasi seat, but by 1.5 lakh. That is a seat where a large number of candidates' applications, nominations, were rejected. I think there were about, ultimately, when the 7 or 8 candidates were allowed, compared to the last time when there were 40 odd, including one comedian who was just popular because he mimicked very harmlessly the Prime Minister, his mode of speaking, right? So there was no reason why that person should not be allowed to stand. He was not going to win, but even he was not allowed to file the nomination, right? After all of that, he won by 1.5 lakh. That is a shocking result, actually. For someone of his stature in the party, in the national imagination, in whose name the entire election was being fought, there was no party. So we talked about a movement party. Literally, that was being dismantled by this personality cult. The BJP party itself is not as strong as it was before. It's not functioning like that, right? And there was a rift perhaps between the BJP and its parent organization, the RSS, because they thought even RSS was not necessary any longer. I mean, the man himself was enough. That person, Modi ka guarantee, right? Everything was around him, and that person wins by only 1.5 lakh. I think that's huge. It's not. It's just not symbolic. I think it has got a material impact on how people who think about BJP, the RSS, their ability to mobilize votes. Finally, Ayodhya again. Their loss in Ayodhya is very, very critical because they went into the elections hoping that the Ayodhya, the temple, the consecration of the temple, the huge, elaborate, almost imperial ceremony that was performed leading up to that event, which is hardly something one would find in a democracy. It's really like something you read about, 500 years ago in some emperor's coronation or something. Like it is exactly like that, and it was supposed to play the same role, right? It was a sort of coronation even before the election happened. It was the crowning of the ruler even before the election was happened. So they went into the election with the king already in place, right? That was the image that they portrayed. And then to lose the very place where the coronation happened, I think is big. And whether Mr. Modi won from Varanasi, and that too by 1.5 lakh, I read somewhere that it is the second lowest margin by which a prime minister has won in the last 30 or 40 years. The last time someone won by this margin or lesser margin lasted for only 200 days in the government. I haven't looked at the data to confirm, but that's what I read somewhere. So I think put all of this together, I think it's a very significant verdict, maybe even more in the current context than what it was in 2004. In 2004, politics was, I would roughly say, roughly the business as usual mode. There was, of course, a right wing in the government, but roughly the contours of the politics was within the business as usual mode. Whereas 2014 onwards, I think what people are talking about is that it was a new normal in politics. Things have completely changed. And I think this pushback basically said that no, that is not the case. We are still living within a polity where symbolically and materially damage can be inflicted in an election that is almost incomprehensibly stacked against the opposition. If you look at formal finances, formal resources, the basic polity is still alive. I'm not going to comment on the other thing that is at stake, which is that people really felt, and there was, I think, at least among a section of the people, that if they come to power, there's a possibility that they would now amend the constitution to make this working of the democratic system impossible. And nobody knows what their ideas were, but I do have a couple of arguments where I think that was a distinct possibility. For example, as I said, they were not as strong as they made it out to be in all these 10 years. They had their core heartland areas in the north and the west, but despite everything that they could marshal within the democratic system, they could not find a stable foothold or a durable foothold in either the east and the south. So sometimes they would gain, sometimes they would lose their gains, right? So they kept being confined to some of the states and kept being out of of the other states. And this happened when they were at their peak, when they were mobilizing the institutions, they're mobilizing fantastic amounts of resource. When the Prime Minister was at the peak of his appeal, even then they could not break into a large number of states, right? So if they had won this time, what could they have done? They had already maxed out in terms of what could they do within the democratic system. The only other recourse they had, the last recourse that they had, would be to break down the only barriers that remained within the democratic system by undermining it through constitutional amendment. So I think there was a real danger when they realized that we have done everything that we could, but this is our limit. We are not going to go further than this within the boundaries of the constitution, constitutional processes. The only way we can go further is by relaxing the constitutional constraints. So I think there was grounds for the fear that they might change the constitution. I think there was a basis. Nobody can be sure, but there was a basis for that. So this was what was at stake. And I think Anup admirably said that we were basically saved by the people. We were bailed out by the people. When they voted in this manner to push back against such a possible outcome. And finally, I think much has been said about the hate speech and the continuous provocation. Almost it's difficult to live through such continuous provocation on a daily basis, right? And I think data or the CSDS survey that we have been talking about clearly show that there is a bias towards, there is a preference or not so much opposition to majoritarianism. I think the survey also shows that more than half of the surveyed people were okay with majoritarianism. That the will of the majority should prevail. But I think the survey also, through its different questions, kind of get a feeling that people do not like in their everyday lives this kind of hate speech, this kind of communal provoking. There are certain notions of decency, of inviolability of certain behavior, and I think whether it was a panic reaction or whatever, I think their star campaigner, the Prime Minister, went too far, and I think even his supporters actually came out even on the mainstream media, they came out and said that, this is too much. I think he crossed the line. And so Dipankar presented the data, and I was happy to note, I have not worked on data, but since he started communalizing and polarizing it turned up the north, basically they started losing more in the subsequent. I think one has to keep in mind the basic decency that inheres in everyday life. And people do value that. That makes it a bit more complex when it comes to what to do, what we can do. I think that's where I would aim. But what to do? I don't think it's a vote in favor of secularism. I think we'll be reading too much into it if we think that. It's a vote for decency, some decorum. Maintain certain lines, don't cross it. But I don't think it's a vote for secularism. I also don't think, I think all of us would agree that there's a revival or a comeback of the left that we don't see here. I also agree with Anup and others that we don't see a consolidation of the votes of the poor or the marginalized behind the challenger, the India Alliance. And I think this is where we need to first understand what's going on in the political economy. Because I think I have been completely clueless for a few years now, because all evidence points to a worsening economic situation of a kind that I personally haven't seen in the last 30 years. And yet, I don't see it in the voting pattern. So something, even in the CSDS survey, I think one of the Dipankar's slide, have your, standard of living improved. And if you read the two columns, same or improved, that's about 77%. But a political economy analysis says that it should be on the other side. More and more people should have said worsen. So what's going on? Are we missing something as social scientists, as political economists, right? What are we missing here? That one thing. Secondly, what is the left politics? What is the challenge here? Okay. What is to be done in a context where the votes might be moving away from, and I think Dipankar is right, votes have shifted away from BJP. But why are they not going towards parties which standing for the poor, for jobs, for welfare? The Bihar case is a classic case. There was a promise for employment. There was a promise for, and they had delivered during the opposition had been in power at the state level for some time, and they had tried to provide jobs. Why didn't that, even short stint, make voters try out at least a new party rather than vote for the party which has been not providing jobs at all? So something is happening out there that we need to figure out. Because I don't think it is solely communalism that is driving the votes. As I said, if it was only communalism, all other identities have been erased, with the communal agenda, Hindutva agenda that is driving the votes, then we can't have this election result. Clearly, people have rejected. But then, where are they going? Who are they voting for? It's fractured. It's a very complex picture, right? So that's why I'm saying it is not a shining India, suffering Bharat narrative that emerges this time, like it did in 2004, which was a surprise loss for the NDA, but it could be understood, right? The economically excluded voted out the party which appeared to be working for the corporate or the affluent. But this time, that is not the vote that we got. So what is it from the leftist side? That is, I think, the main job that we have at hand. I'll stop here and wait for the questions. Sharam dropped out?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm looking for him.
Yeah.
I think he lost connection for some reason. He's
Yeah,
coming.
There you go. I'm back.
Yes.
Amazing set of presentations. We have a lot of questions, so I'm gonna dive straight into the questions, and we're gonna go in the order in which they came in, and the questions are all for all four of our scholars. So I'm gonna start with a question that I'm also personally really interested in, and Rajesh also kind of talked about that particular problem. It's from Aritra Basu. She asks that we have seen that the parliamentary left did not do well in some of the core states, though winning elsewhere. Where do we place the Indian left at this juncture, and do they even matter? That's a question. I'm going to start with Professor Basu, Saundarya, each one of you. So the question pertains to the parliamentary left of India, and where do they stand?
There is no doubt that if we look over the last decade or so, there has been a steady decline of the parliamentary left. That has certainly not been reversed this time, though there are some promising seats in Bihar and other parts where the left has won. Right now, I don't think it, we cannot write it off, but it is a long way before it can come back to the stature it had in Indian politics 2-3 decades ago. So a lot more work needs to be done.
Saundarya, please go ahead.
I think I would agree with that. I think there is a lot of regrouping to be done, sort of finding an ideological pivot and rebuilding its cadre-based organization, I think, to counter the BJP materially, symbolically, ideologically. I think that's it, again, like Professor Basu said, it's not one can't write it off, but there is a lot of rebuilding to be done.
Hello?
The old left have to be revived. The school teacher in the village. Actually, I'm trying to go back to that Pracharak Satyagrahi model again. That one who works in the village, rural, not too elite, not too urbanized, okay, not too westernized, has some connect with Indian society, everyday life, as Rajesh was pointing out, and the nitty-gritties of everyday life. Connection with people, relationship building. We have to build and rebuild the left from below, not by parliamentary machinations, coalition politics, this, that. No, that's not going to do it. That's only the icing on the cake. The cake is social reconstruction, political reconstruction of human minds. So that is a long work we have to do again. Sorry to say this, actually, the left in power sometimes becomes a problem, because that's the BJP in power, the establishment BJP. Okay, so the left in power sometimes becomes a problem. It's very difficult to make a comeback once it has been in power for some time. So I think the old left, CPI, the Undivided Communist Party of India, modest living, ethical living, dharma, connection with the rural is very important.
Very interesting. Rajesh bhai?
Yeah, so yeah, it's a very complex question. I don't know if I have an answer, but I think the Indian society is going through some sort of churn, which I don't think we are understanding. So the traditional left approach would be to look at the exploitation, right, or the marginalization, right, and then speak for the victims. It may not work in a particular conjecture where there's a lot of aspirations, driving the people. They may not like to be portrayed as exploited, marginalized victims who need a champion. So while it is materially true, as I said, that is a disjuncture that's bothering me. It is true that the economic condition is pretty bad. Now, unless Dipankar would know that a lot of data is not available. If we have the data, probably we get a better picture. So there is a disjunction between what the data says about the economic condition and what people's politics actually say. And I think there is a politics around aspirations, the manipulation of the aspirations, even as they get continuously frustrated. And I think the left is caught between the old discourse of exploitation, which has a material basis, but in the subjective factor, people who don't want to be thought of as being exploited, being an expeditioner. So I was reminded of a survey done several years ago by political scientists, not connected to the elections, but people are asked who consider themselves to be middle class in India. An astounding percentage of the respondents said they were middle class, 50-60%. If you just look at the incomes, it is amazing. I read, I think 5-6 years ago, one of the reports said that 92% of male of women and 82% of male earn less than 10,000 per month, and yet 50-60% people thought they were middle class.
Yeah,
I think it pointed to some sort of aspirations-driven society, and I think BJP and particularly Mr. Modi has used it remarkably effectively. in their political rhetoric. I think everything that they say or he says in particular is, is to use that aspiration as a very powerful driver of emotions and actions. And I think this is what left finds finding it very difficult to navigate. So they can't pander to the aspirations because they know that the reality is not there. But if they actually talk to the reality, people may not be willing to listen to them. So I'm not sure. This is just a conjecture, but I have this feeling that that's what's happening out. Even in Bengal, for example, the left keeps talking about industrialization and the jobs and everything, which is basically promising corporate kind of development and good jobs and all of that, right? That is playing into the aspirations. And that's a dangerous game, I think, to play into, because it's difficult to beat the opponent on that game. They've mastered that craft. So I think that's something we need to figure out, how to handle the political economy in politics. Yeah.
Wow. So the next question is from Tavish Hari, who's a history student, undergraduate student at Ashoka University. And he asks a fairly difficult question. I'm going to put it to the panel. His question is, what was the class or ideological basis of Modi's claim to being supernatural / indestructible? So which set of class forces were responsible for creating that myth? I believe that is the question. And he then proposes, was it clerical fascism, pre-capitalist class ideology, or something else? So a question framed in a difficult language. What was the class basis of Modi's claim to being this mythical, supernatural kind of a figure? I think that's the basis of the question. Deepankar.
I will pass the question. I do not want to speculate.
That's fine. Anoop?
Saundarya? No?
No?
No, I'm asking her because she comes before me.
Jay, please.
Oh, that's a difficult question to answer. I think in terms of, like Rajesh was saying, Modi has played, or the BJP has played, this very fine balancing game where they've tried to sort of bring together the actual middle class. This is kind of the elite sort of, the highly educated kind of urban middle class that kind of supports this vision for India that Modi and BJP have projected, this very aggressive, masculine, sort of strong, state that is able to stand up to China, stand up to a belligerent Pakistan. So it kind of feeds into that sort of hyper masculinized space that you see. I think it's the urban middle class and the aspirational sort of, classes where, they don't want to see themselves as oppressed anymore, as very rightly Rajesh was saying, where it's about sort of, positioning yourself as being empowered and being able to speak the language of power, being able to sort of access power. I think so. So the BJP and Modi's kind of image, it's very carefully branded. And it speaks to those aspirations, I think. So the class basis, and then it of course goes along with, I think, what Professor Basu was talking about in terms of this oligopolistic sort of crony capitalism that we see, where it's very ably supported by all of these close economic allies of the BJP who want to sort of push that image because it benefits them. So that would be sort of my take.
Difficult to answer it very quickly. It cannot be answered, actually. I'll connect Rajesh and Saundarya's point actually over here, that it is both at a material level exploitative and at a psychological level aspirational. So how do you connect these two constantly? Now, which is where the larger question comes, that what is voting, what is an election, who do you support, who do you vote for? These things cannot be explained by one cause, and the person who understands it best is the Prime Minister, actually. Mr. Modi gets it the best, actually, that it will not be one cause. Multiple layers will have to be stitched, actually. It's what in our terminology we call bricolage, actually, that multiple parts of the parchment will have to be stitched and stitched and stitched and produced. So in that sense, myths are, the mythological is very, very important in the political. What would you think that the mythological is religious, something ancient, traditional, and political is something modern, secular? It's never like that,
Right.
actually. It's always a combination of these two working their way out in different ways. So the mythological becomes very, very important over here, and the religious mythological, as if the, which is why that coronation was very, very important. So his question is actually interesting, how pre-capitalist feudal elements, capitalist completely modern elements will be cocktailed in very complex ways, and that is the cocktailing that is perhaps needed to touch the Indian voters mind. I would dare to say unconscious also. Okay.
Fair
Or
enough.
the collective unconscious of the Indian voter.
Yes.
Actually, it is important to touch that. And he somehow knows to
Yeah.
actually craft that or graft that very, very well. And I think that was a just last line, Shahram, actually. Rajesh, I would have loved it had he been here. Let him in, actually. He's asking to be let in.
Yeah.
Rajesh, it's so interesting, actually, that very question of aspiration that the right worked on actually came to bite it. That very aspirational element became a Frankenstein for it. This time, the
Yes.
aspirational voter has not voted for him. Actually, it's the beneficiary voter who has voted for him. Looks like early data. Let us look more at it closely. But that very aspirational thing has come to bite. So, Shahra, my only point is that the mythological can come to bite as well. The politics of hate, extreme statements can come to bite as well, actually. So the only line is this: medicine in too high a dose is poison. So sometimes medicine can become poison, and this election is perhaps a good example of
So, so building on Tavish's question, there's a question from Temur Malik, who's a PhD student at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. And I think the question is specifically for Professor Basu, that did you find any evidence for voting along demographic, like age-wise? In particular, the question pertains to Gen Z. We just heard from Tavish Hari, who's a member of that particular group. So, did you find that there's any evidence that the Gen Z uh, demographic stands somewhat differently in terms of approaching their voting patterns, etc.? Is there any evidence for that? And Anoop, since you worked on the ground, I would like to have your opinion on this as well. But first, Professor Basu, did you find any evidence that youth or that kind of variable has any impact?
Yes, so I was looking for that evidence, and what I found is surprising. So the young voters did not. So there is a very marginal decline in the proportion of young voters who voted for BJP. So uh, so I had thought, my initial thought was that uh, BJP came to power in 2014 with the promise of generating employment, and it clearly failed over the next 10 years, and that should have led to young people not voting. But as Anu rightly pointed out, there are not one cause, there are multiple causes. So other causes overlaid. So even though young people probably did not get what they expected, other causes came in, and that was a surprising result for me. Young people, more or less, their vote percentage for BJP has remained unchanged. This is another thing we need to really think about.
I don't have anything to add. He has said it, actually. Young people voting has stayed more or less with the BJP. So we really need to look at it, and say Chhattisgarh, say Madhya Pradesh. Young people have voted for the BJP, must have voted. More women have voted for the BJP in Chhattisgarh. Not nationally, but in Chhattisgarh they have. Okay, well, they have in Bengal voted for TMC. So again, but the national data, as Professor Basu has already shared, actually, and this I'm not very sure. The CSDS Lokniti data will have to be seen further. It looks like there is a marginal increase in the voting of young people for the BJP. Marginal increase. We have to look at it further, but at least it's not decreased.
Right.
But did Dalit voters decrease? Yes, it decreased. So again, you are not getting it by young voters. Which young voter actually? The upper caste young voter and the Dalit young voter, Rajesh's aspirational young voter, and the young voter who says I'm exploited, oppressed. So it's complex.
So we're running out of time and we have exactly 4 minutes left. I wanted to pose this question to all the scholars, since there are young people in India, progressive voices in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, who are watching this live right now. In your experience and in your wisdom and your knowledge, do you have a message for those progressive voices, those young progressive voices in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and South Asia, who want to see a progressive, social democratic, socialist uh, South Asia? What would be your one line message? How should we unite the many to fight the few? Please, Professor Basu.
I mean, as I said earlier, also, I think this election, I am reading it clearly as a message against a politics of hate and for a politics of economic justice, social justice, and human rights, political rights. So I think it the people saved us by saying that this kind of politics should be done. It can be championed. We are with you. Come forward. So I think it is a message for all the young activists in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh that go ahead. The people are with you.
Soundarya, please go ahead. If you have any message for the young activists, scholars, thinkers who want to bring about progressive change in South Asia, what would be that message?
I think, as we've seen over the last few years, even at the pinnacle of like BJP's success and its sort of overwhelming hegemonic power at the center, there have been very successful resistance movements despite all odds. The NRC protests that kind of brought into focus how marginalized sections, people who you don't expect to see on the streets, kind of blockade streets for such a long time. Muslim women or women in general, sort of leading the farmers' agitations, right? So that is a ray of hope that, when people feel strongly for a cause, they can sort of, exploit these against all odds. If they believe in the cause, they can come together and sort of, create resistance, create opposition to even the best of the dictators, right? And I think the South Asian audience has, or the South Asian voters have proved it time and time again.
Right.
This is not the first step in, by any means, the first electoral sort of a step in the history of South Asian democratic politics. So I think this is a ray of hope. This is kind of what, people or, other groups, protesting for just causes should be capitalizing on, that there is always a way.
Absolutely. Anubhai?
Quickly, multiple layers of struggles. The YouTubers have saved us this time, young YouTubers actually. Farmers protest, Shaheen Bagh, and many layers of protests, multiple struggles, connecting with them constantly. A tolerant multiplicity of struggles, not one way, no monotheist way, no highway and my way. Okay, even the left have to learn to live multiplicity, as Rajesh kind of practically pointed out. Okay, and in that sense, just one line. We should not be too urban. We should not be too Western, and trust the people of the country. They have repeatedly done it in Southeast Asia. Okay. They are not suffering from false consciousness. We are not the vanguards. Learn to learn from below and connect with rural forest societies, Dalit, non-urbanized people, we will learn a lot about a new political and a new transformational pathway rather than our own vanguard path.
Amazing. Rajesh bhai, final words.
Yeah, yeah. So very quickly, others have said it. I think the only thing that we might want to remember is that politics doesn't work like a formula. It's never works like that. It's ultimately driven by passions. Even when there are material, objective factors, it's passion drives it, right? And I think people muddle through, in their when they resist. And we in this election also we sort of walk through blindly, muddle through twists and turns, and that's how it always works. Just because it's not working out linearly or according to a particular in a particular trajectory, clear trajectory, it doesn't mean that there is a Tina factor working. There's always alternatives. It might not always be visible, but one has to keep faith in the process, which always ultimately walks through, because life itself is the essence of life is plenitude. You can't replace it with single monolithic visions, whoever that is. So that's the belief and faith in politics that I would like to
Absolutely.
kind of.
Absolutely. I want to thank all my guests, the entire panel, Professor Basu, Professor Chidambaram, Professor Dar, and obviously Professor Bhattacharya, for the amazing, insightful discussion as well as the hope at the end. I want to conclude with the words of the great Faiz Ahmad Faiz, who famously said that "Yuhi hamesha ulajhti rahi hai zulm se khalq, na unki rasm nahi hai, na apni reet nahi. यूं ही हमेशा खिलाए हैं हमने आग में फूल, ना उनकी हार नहीं है ना अपनी जीत नहीं. गर आज तुझसे जुदा हैं तो कल बहम होंगे, ये रात भर की जुदाई तो कोई बात नहीं. गर आज औज पे है तालाए रकीब तो क्या, ये रात भर की खुदाई तो कोई बात नहीं. I'm signing out, guys. Please follow our work on Rethinking Marxism and Inqilab Zindabad. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.